Chapter 6, Sasquash versus Andrew, the deputy of Pearin. Argo said, I have a question for you. Why did you leave before Master Shaman got to talk to you? Twinkle said, what? I didn't know he sent a transmission from the Rajetti Temple. Wilfred said, wait, it's the Rajetti we're after. Get them both! Twinkle said, if Wilfred thinks he has a pain in his butt, then Wilfred needs to get that checked. Argo said, sorry to interrupt, but I think Wilfred is coming our way. Hagar said, yeah, that Rajetti and that Andrew fool make it too easy for Delilah and her gang. Argo said, let's do this, buddy. Emmanuel said, hold Delilah and her gang and go for that transport of gold. Sasquatch said, what in the... So Sasquatch looked back and ducked before the deputy could rope him up. Sasquatch said, ha, you missed me. Andrew said, you're only making it worse for yourself, Rajetti. That's when Twinkle and Argo started up their jetpacks and head into the woods to get away from Wilfred and his gang. Twinkle said, it's exciting to make it hard for you to catch us. Argo said, we just need to keep him from capturing us. Wilfred said, you're a bunch of pathetic excuses of Rajetti. No wonder you're not Rajetti warriors like your friend Sasquatch. That's when Twinkle got upset and he landed. Argo said, Twinkle, wait! Wilfred said, it looks like our bounty is surrendering. Twinkle said, no one says we won't be true Rajetti warriors, you ignorant fool. Hagar said, what is this? The Rajetti is tough enough to fight us? Ooh, we're scared. Emmanuel said, shut up, fool. Twinkle said, you lack teamwork. That's why you haven't captured me yet. That's when Wilfred got off his horse and ran towards Twinkle. Wilfred said, why, you little? That's when Twinkle flew off before Wilfred caught him in time and got a face full of sand. Argo starts laughing. She laughs to the point she starts to lose control of the jetpack. Twinkle said, Argo, I got you. Wilfred said, what in the heck? Hagar said, Emmanuel, you know you want to laugh at this. Emmanuel said, yeah, you're right. So both Hagar and Emmanuel laughed at Wilfred's misfortune. That's when Wilfred looked back, and that's when Hagar and Emmanuel stopped in their tracks. Twinkle said, you're going to have to do better than that. Wilfred said, what was that, Rajetti? You want some of this? Give me my jetpack. Hagar said, yes, boss. Wilfred said, Hagar, if you and Emmanuel laugh at my misfortune again, I'll make you eat the sand around you. Emmanuel said, get him, boss. Twinkle said, I think you're going to have to catch me. Argo, start up your jetpack. I got a plan. Wilfred said, that is what I'm going to do when I'm done with you. I'll be hanging your head on my wall. Twinkle said, barbaric. Hannah said, Twinkle, Twinkle, if he's your man, he can do it. If he can smoke you, he can beat you. Hagar said, go eat your bucket of nutty buddies. Hannah said, why don't you do that since you did that to Emmanuel behind closed doors? Argo said, what in the world? Hagar said, what are you talking about? Who said that? Emmanuel said, someone made a rumor about us. Hannah said, okay, baby carrot. Emmanuel said, what did you say to me? Hannah said, whatever you say, baby. Argo said, carrot. Wilfred said, what? Hannah said, whatever you say, baby. Your face now, carrot. Wilfred said, enough of this. This is where it ends. Right here, right now. Twinkle said, holy cow, he's pissed with me. Wilfred said, you can bet your bottom dollar that I'm pissed with you and I'm going to kick your... Argo said, but I don't think so. Wilfred said, don't interrupt me when I'm talking about... Twinkle said, your butt? Wilfred said, my butt in your face. I might make that happen. Argo said, okay, Bruno. Hagar said, don't make him have to slap you. Twinkle said, with what? His... Argo said, laser beam? Sasquatch said, don't make me laugh, you pathetic excuse of a deputy. And Andrew, your mom really hated you. Hagar said, you're so pathetic. Argo said, not as pathetic as you. Emmanuel said, we'll see about that. Hagar said, I bet both the deputy and that Rajetti's mother never taught them some manners as kids. Argo said, excuse me, fool? Sasquatch said, did he just talk about my mom? Andrew said, wow, that's it. That's when Andrew threw the rope and lassoed Sasquatch, right when he saw Sasquatch was confused at what happened. Sasquatch said, what? Are you serious? I'm going to get you for bringing up my late mother, you ignorant fool. Andrew said, it looks like I caught me a Rajetti. Hagar said, I would be careful if I were you, deputy. Sasquatch said, you're the one to talk about being careful when you disrespected our mothers, you ignoramus. Emmanuel said, let the Rajetti see his last moments with the deputy before the Rajetti ends up on his wall. Andrew said, no one's going on my wall. That's when, as soon as Andrew said that, Sasquatch knew he had to take Andrew for the ride of his life. Sasquatch said, hey, deputy, I got a question. Andrew said, what is it? Sasquatch said, Deputy, hope you like being dragged by a Rajeti warrior through the village square. That's when Andrew noticed the rope was around his arm. Andrew said, hey, wait. Let's talk about this. I'll let go of the rope and you can get a 10-second head start. Sasquatch said, no time to talk. Let's ride. But Andrew knew his arm was stuck in the rope. Andrew said, don't you do it. Sasquatch said, oh, you said do it? Okay. Andrew said, you ignorant son of a... So Sasquatch took Andrew for a ride and he was enjoying it. Andrew said, knock it off, Rajeti. Sasquatch said, let me go and I'll spare you, bud. Andrew said, never! Andrew said, holy cow, that deputy is horrible at his job. Sasquatch said, then continue to suffer. Twinkle said, don't hurt him too much or he'll have a hernia. That was when Sasquatch took Andrew through the whole village square. Hannah and Argo was enjoying the fact that a Rajeti warrior was dragging the most disrespectful deputy through the village square. Hannah said, ooh, Rajeti, don't hurt him too much or he'll crap himself. Argo looked at Hannah with that look on her face when Hannah said that. Hannah said, what? Andrew said, ha ha, very funny. We'll see how funny it is when you lose your job as barber. Hannah said, more like you losing your job as a deputy if you don't let him go. Andrew said, okay, Rajeti, let me go or else. Sasquatch said, actually, that is the question I just asked you earlier. Hannah said, now he looks stupid. Andrew said, okay, fine. Rajeti, I'll let you go, but you're going to have to return to your ship. Sasquatch said, not without my friend. I heard he basically was hiding in this town. Twinkle said, hide guys! Nick said, really? Andrew said, how do I know you're lying about this? Twinkle said, I think we've seen enough. Nick said, no, Rajeti, I got this. So the sheriff shot at the rope, keeping Sasquatch roped up, and Andrew started to roll around until he got to the area where the sheriff was waiting for him. And the sheriff went by Nick Bannon. Andrew said, thank God you helped me out, Nick. This Rajeti is crazy. Nick said, really? This Rajeti warrior is our guest on this planet since helping out Rudget, the Rajeti warrior, take out Striker. Andrew said, really? Him? But he looks like he would shed all over our jailhouse. Argo said, more like you would shed your stupidity. Nick said, now that you're done? So if you or any other townfolk have a problem with the Rajeti warriors, I'll make any of you help my deputy clean up the horse's poop from the stalls. Andrew said, the barber did. Nick said, she knows the biz. But if any of you villagers have a problem with the laws of this village, I'll make you terranoids help the deputy clean up the horse poop from the stalls. Andrew said, please, Nick, sheriff, anything but that. Nick said, okay, deputy, since you said please now, I'll apologize to this Rajeti. Argo said, yeah, see you're sorry. Sasquatch said, he doesn't have to do that. He already learned his lesson. Nick said, maybe I should escort you to your Rajeti jet, even though it has no fuel to get off, Rajeti warrior. Sasquatch said, never mind then. Hannah said, I wouldn't make things worse for yourself. Nick said, well, thank you for putting my deputy on blast, Hannah. Oh, I mean Miss Hannah, my faithful barber. Okay, Andrew, apologize now, my deputy. Andrew said, fine. I'm sorry for being a complete irritating piece of work. Sasquatch said, and I'm sorry for dragging you through the village square. Hannah said, I'm not. It was very entertaining. That's when Nick looked at Hannah for making that comment in front of him. Hannah said, and I'll get back to my job cutting your hair before Nick flips out on me. Nick said, since that's settled, Sasquatch, is it? Argo said, oh, the name is Argo. You're amazing as the sheriff of this fine planet. Sasquatch said, yeah, Nick, that's right. Nick said, go and get yourself a drink for you and the missus. Argo said, I'm not really that thirsty. Sasquatch said, come on, Argo, before he changes his mind. Nick said, and stay out of trouble if you know what I mean. Argo said, oh, me and Twinkle? Twinkle? Where did he go? Nick said, maybe you'll find him in the tavern. Argo said, oh, right. Andrew said, really? You don't really trust that Rajeti, do you? Nick said, I wouldn't trust you with a 10-foot pole either. Sneaking girls into our place of operations, and that bothers me too. Andrew said, how do you know that? Nick said, Hannah saw you the other day. Andrew said, that barber should stay out of our business. Nick said, our business? Don't you mean yours? And if you don't stop bringing them in to play cops and ho-ho-hos, it will be a problem. Andrew said, you mean also cuffing them to the jail bells and having fun with them? Nick said, "You do what?" Andrew said, "Cuff them to the bars and play patty cake with their cheeks." Nick said, "You know what I said, you dirty perv, and you have been letting the prisoners watch you creep? Go and clean the horse's poop. Now I have to read them back their rights and privileges while behind those bars." Hannah said, "You're such a dirty little boy." Andrew said, "Wait, are you being sarcastic?" Hannah said, "Yeah, I'm being sarcastic because you wouldn't last a day in my shoes either, deputy." Nick said, "Horse's poop, now." Andrew said, "Duty calls, get it, because it's poop." Nick said, "Oh, Miss Hannah, you let me handle this." Hannah said, "I was just being sarcastic." Nick said, "But I want to make sure he isn't being so disrespectful. Listen, I have your back." Hannah said, "You're right. I was out of line. Thanks, Sheriff Nick." One of Andrew's mistresses, Miriam, wasn't too pleased that the sheriff had the barber spy on her client. Miriam said, "So, you would trust a Rigetti over your own deputy? What a scumbag." Miriam also had two other girls that were pleasing the deputy by giving him private dances. One of the prisoners were named Todd, and he enjoyed it when that deputy wasn't being smart about his situation. Todd said, "Hey there, good-looking. Why don't you give Daddy a try? I bet I would rock your world." Miriam said, "Oh, honey, you would be the last thing I would be worrying about." That's when Todd's cellmate Samuel had something to say to Miriam. Samuel said, "Hey there, Miriam, is it? I bet your other two girls are more gorgeous than you are." That's when one of Miriam's dancers named Pollyanna had something to say to Samuel. Pollyanna said, "Samuel, is it? How do you know we're hotter than Miriam?" That's when Pollyanna grabbed on his manhood and put it against the bars. Pollyanna said, "Now, how do your nuts feel against these bars?" Miriam said, "That's enough, Pollyanna. He gets the point." That's when Pollyanna released her grip on Samuel. Elle said, "The deputy owes us big for all the service we give him." Miriam said, "Patience, girls, in due time." Andrew said, "That barber had the nerve." Nick said, "Less talking, more work." And Andrew said, "Hey, when can I have a break? My back is killing me, Nick." Pollyanna said, "That's not the only thing that's gonna hurt for him." So Sasquatch and Argo arrived inside the tavern, and every biker gang within Pearin was staring at Argo. Sasquatch said, "Who are they staring at?" Argo said, "I think it's me, because I'm wearing this soldier's armor." "Take a picture. It will last longer." Sasquatch said, "Let's just get on with what we're doing." Delilah said, "Arthur Rigetti there?" Wolford said, "Yes, and pretty much I can't wait until we get our hands on them before you do." Delilah said, "You will do no such thing until I get there." Wolford said, "Ooh, I'm scared." Delilah said, "Yeah, you should be, fool." Hagar said, "Let me at her, boss." Diana said, "You and what army? The Cocktail Arena army?" Deborah said, "Well, play Diana." Delilah said, "I think you earned my respect." Diana said, "And another thing I have to say, Hagar, why is your long john so small?" Delilah said, "We are ending this call." Diana said, "Why did you do that for?" "I was on a roll." Deborah said, "Because your ego was showing." Diana said, "I don't have an ego." "Right, Delilah?" Hagar said, "You know this call isn't over." Delilah said, "Well, you do, Diana." Emmanuel said, "Oh, is the little girl gonna cry?" Diana said, "This call is over." That's when Diana ended the call. Deborah said, "Diana, don't take it so hard." Delilah said, "Let her go. She needs time to herself." Diana said, "You know what, Delilah? This conversation is over." So Diana starts to cry on her bed. Meanwhile, Sasquatch and Argo entered the tavern. The fellow villagers in the tavern looked at Sasquatch and Argo and wondered why Argo was wearing soldier's armor and where she got it. But Sasquatch and Argo didn't give them any mind, as they basically knew they had to get some info of where their friend was. Meanwhile, Diana got all of her frustrations out from her crying when Deborah entered her quarters. Deborah said, "We have to go." Diana said, "You could have knocked." Deborah said, "Excuse me? I've had it here with your ego." Delilah said, "Enough!" That's when Delilah used her powers to put both Deborah and Diana in a chokehold. Deborah and Diana were gasping for air. When Diana tried to say she was sorry, Delilah said, "What was that?" But Diana couldn't speak loud enough because she was turning blue in the face after saying sorry 3 times. Delilah said, "Oh, my bad." Deborah and Diana said, "We're sorry." Delilah said, "Good. Now get out." Diana said, "She could have knocked." Delilah said, "Now." That girl. Meanwhile, that's when Wilfred walked into the tower with Hagar and Emmanuel in tow, and that's when they took a seat at the bartender's area. Wilfred said, "Hey, Rod, I need a scotch on the rocks." The bartender, whose name was Rod, wondered why Wilfred and his gang would be in his tavern. Rod said, "Wilfred, what are you doing here? And do you mean you want a scotch on the rocks?" Wilfred said, "Yeah, that's what I meant. And keep it down. I don't want to attract any more attention than I already have, as I'm trying to capture a Rajetti on the loose." Rod said, "Okay, 1 scotch on the rocks coming out for you." So Rod poured Wilfred a scotch on the rocks. Rod said, "And for you, sir?" Emmanuel said, "Well, Rod, I would love a Bloody Shirley with a celery on the side." Hagar said, "Well, Rod, and for me, I would love a Rajetti Adams, and with no foam." So Rod handed Hagar a cold bottle of Rajetti Adams. Wilfred said, "Wait, excuse me, fool?" Hagar said, "But I love Rajetti Adams. It's the most amazing beer ever made." Wilfred said, "Why don't you marry it then?" Rod said, "I could arrange for that. I'm also a registered minister in this village." Sasquash said, "Hey, can I get something to drink?" So Rod wondered why a Rajetti warrior would ask for a drink. Rod said, "Can I help you, sir?" Sasquash said, "Yes, my kind bartender." Hagar said, "It's Rod, you ignoramus." Sasquash said, "Okay, Rod, can I please get a drink?" Rod said, "Okay, pick your poison. And I don't mean drink poison. That would be bad." Sasquash said, "Well, Rod, I would like a pint of your finest Rajetti milk." Wilfred said, "Wait a minute. I know that voice somewhere. Just don't know where. But I think I've heard it somewhere." Argo said, "No, I don't think you know him at all." That's when Argo covered her face in utter shame. Rod said, "Really? What are you here for?" Argo said, "I would love a Bloody Shirley too." Sasquash said, "Argo, what are you doing?" Argo said, "Play along or you'll get us in trouble." Emmanuel said, "Yeah, answer the question, fool." Hagar said, "Yeah, answer the question, fool." Emmanuel said, "Don't make me give you a knuckle sandwich." Hagar said, "You and what army?" Emmanuel said, "My fist in your face is all the army I need." Sasquash said, "A pint of your finest Rajetti milk." Argo said, "Are you serious, Mon?" That's when Rod pulled out his blaster. Rod said, "I ain't got time for these games, Rajetti. I would head back to where you came from and never come back." Argo said, "Now listen here. My friend would also love to get a Bloody Shirley as well." Sasquash said, "Argo, you really should know I can't handle being drunk." Wilfred said, "Go on. Put that drink where your mouth is, pipsqueak. Come on." Sasquash said, "Fine. Say I didn't warn you." That's when Sasquash grabbed Argo's drink by mistake and took a sip. Argo said, "Dude, are you serious?" That is when Sasquash started to see pretty pink elephants with purple ears. Argo said, "Sasquash, are you okay, buddy? You don't look so good." Sasquash said, "Hey, Argo, do you see pretty pink elephants with purple ears with some pretty pink," Argo said, "princess panties?" Sasquash said, "Stop it, Argo. Stop it." Argo said, "Okay, buddy, I think you've had enough." Sasquash said, "I'll tell you when I've had enough. Mommy, Daddy, why did you have to die?" Rod said, "Well, this guy really can't handle his brewski." Argo said, "Hey, Rod, can we get him a pint of the finest Rajetti milk? My friend is tipsy." Sasquash said, "Everybody, this song is copyrighted. In this tavern, copyrighted. Everybody, this song is copyrighted. In this tavern, copyrighted." Argo said, "I think we need to get you sober." Sasquash said, "You can't make me. I want the pretty pink elephants with purple ears to be my friends." Argo said, "Please, bartender, I beg of you, please get us a pint of your finest Rajetti milk." That is when Rod decided to make him a pint. Wilfred said, "Wait, you're that Rajetti that messed up Delilah and your gang's plans, and she is too." Argo said, "Dude, let me get him sober so we can at least battle you." Sasquatch said, I had no other choice, otherwise that transport would have been robbed. So stop messing with me, sailor. Argo said, down the hatch. Sasquatch said, you can't make me. You can't make me. Argo said, fine. Maybe I'll show Ratchet the video of you getting drunk. Sasquatch said, what? But he would hate me for that. You wouldn't do that. Argo said, try me, Rigetti warrior. That's when Argo had Sasquatch open his mouth and drink it. Sasquatch said, why did you do that? Argo said, I think we're under attack, fool. Sasquatch said, what do you mean? They're harmless, pretty pink elephants. That's when Sasquatch realized it, when he started to sober up. Sasquatch said, oh, crap. That's when Sasquatch decided to back away with Argo. Sasquatch said, Argo, where did they come from? Wilfred said, you're going to be sorry when we're done with you. That's when Nick saw 3 Rigetti cycles and matched the description of Wilfred, Emmanuel, and Hagar. Nick said, wait, are these Wilfred and his gang's Rigetti cycles? What is going on here? Andrew said, I'm done with the horse poop. What do you want me to do now? Nick said, well, Deputy, we need to start helping the Rigetti out. Andrew said, oh, do I have to? Nick said, don't make me give the job to Hannah. Andrew said, okay, I'll do it. Nick said, prepare yourself for what's about to happen. Andrew said, what's going to happen? Nick said, we're going in. Miriam said, so that's where he's going. Andrew said, hold on, I got to get my belt on. Pollyanna said, hello there, sweet cheeks. Andrew said, on second thought, I'm coming. So Nick handed Andrew a pistol. Nick said, good catch. Andrew said, wow, here we go. Elle said, that cheapskate, he'll pay for this. All those long nights cuffing me to the bars and making out to those pervs. Miriam said, let's get geared up for battle, that cheapskate of a deputy. Meanwhile, in the tavern, Sasquatch and Argo were in the middle of a standoff with Wilfred, Hagar, Emmanuel, and the bartender Rod himself. Sasquatch said, you think you guys threaten us? Rod said, you have to the count of 3 to get your low life, no good Rigetti ass out of my tavern before I blast you. Argo said, dude, are you serious? I'm also a Rigetti. So if you want to mess with my friend, you're going to deal with me too. That's when Nick, the sheriff, and his deputy, Andrew, I know, horrible name. Anyways, they appeared in the tavern and wondered what was going on. Andrew said, Nick, why does Rod have a blaster aimed at Sasquatch and Argo? Nick said, what did you guys do? Hagar said, I think they can explain it to you. Andrew said, why don't you shut your mouth, outlaw? Argo said, excuse me, sheriff? I'm a lady here. Nick said, my apologies. Sasquatch said, all I asked was for a pint of the finest Rigetti milk, and he flipped. Nick said, Rod, put your blaster down. They're with me. Wilfred said, the sheriff. Andrew said, let me take them down. Nick said, that won't be necessary. Andrew said, well, Wilfred is right there. Sasquatch said, dude, there is 4 of us and 4 of them. That's when Wilfred blasts at the sheriff, and Sasquatch blocks it with his Leo saber. Nick said, thank you. That's when Nick decided to knock over a metal table with Sasquatch next to him. Wilfred said, that table isn't going to protect. Hagar said, not to mention we have your friends surrounded. Wilfred said, what is it going to be, Rigetti? You surrender now, or they die. Nick said, take out the deputy, but leave the Rigetti girl out of this. Sasquatch said, what? Nick said, dude, play along. Sasquatch said, yeah, take out the deputy, but leave my friend out of this. Andrew said, you guys are so despicable. Nick said, you think I want you to die? But if you don't stop bringing those girls in our place of operations, you're gonna be killed. Andrew said, wait, what did you say? Did you say our place of operations? Nick said, no. I thought I said it was only mine, since you're my partner. Andrew said, did you say partner? Nick said, for heaven's sakes, this is not the best time. That's when Sasquatch saw Rod was aiming his blaster at Argo, and he freaked out. Sasquatch said, Argo! So Sasquatch fired his blaster at Rod, killing him on sight, while Argo subdued Hagar. Wilfred said, what in the heck? Nick said, what in the heck, dude? Sasquatch said, he was going to shoot an innocent bystander. Nick said, my bartender? He made the best Bloody Shirleys in the universe. Andrew said, oh really? And I'm the hypocrite. Nick said, fine. He served the finest pint of Rigetti milk from Rigetti itself. It's only the best. Sasquatch said, when it's served fresh. You should have fined his ass. Meanwhile, back at the jailhouse, Miriam said, "Ready, girls?" Pollyanna said, "Ready for battle, Miriam." Elle said, "Ready for battle too. Let's do this." Miriam said, "Our mission is simple. We take out that cheapskate of a deputy for making us do everything for him without paying us for this long." Pollyanna said, "What about those prisoners that were watching us?" Elle said, "That show should have been paid up front." Meanwhile, Wilfred and his gang looked in horror as Rod was dead on the ground. Hagar said, "Let's get out of here." That's when Wilfred and his gang ran out the back way. Argo said, "What? Wilfred and his gang are getting away." Nick said, "Wait, Argo." Miriam said, "Let her go." Pollyanna said, "We're going to have so much fun with the deputy." Nick said, "Oh, crap." Elle said, "Oh, crap indeed." Meanwhile, outside of the tavern, Delilah and her gang watched as her rival Wilfred and his gang ran for it. Delilah said, "Let me guess, the Roggetti's inside, and you're scared of them?" Wilfred said, "No, you idiot! The sheriff and deputy are in there, and the bartender is dead." Deborah said, "Rod, they will pay." Delilah said, "Hey, Deborah." That's when Diana slapped Deborah in front of Delilah. Deborah said, "What was that for?" Diana said, "For letting your emotions get the best of you." Delilah said, "Hey, fools, take our Roggetti cycles." That's when Delilah's gang gave them their Roggetti cycles. Wilfred said, "Thanks for your services." And Hagar, "What are you doing?" Hagar said, "They're a Roggetti cycle short." Wilfred said, "Then how did you get here?" Diana said, "Supplies. It was mine because she had to get hers destroyed." Hagar said, "It's better than nothing, boss." Delilah said, "Well, since that's settled, we'll get our Roggetti cycles and head out as well." Wilfred said, "What? Without the bounty? You're so brave." Diana said, "Yeah, and you're a complete coward." Emmanuel said, "Let me at her, boss." Diana said, "Come on, Emmanuel. Come on. Come on, Emmanuel." Meanwhile, inside the tavern, Elle said, "Oh no, Rod." Pollyanna said, "What? What did you do to him?" Andrew said, "And you called me the creep, Sheriff?" Nick said, "Don't make me punch you." Andrew said, "I'm just saying, Sheriff." Nick said, "You're just saying? How about you're just saying with my fist in your face?" Sasquash said, "Sheriff, this is not the best time for jokes. This is serious." Andrew said, "As serious as you." Deborah said, "What do I hear in there about Rod?" Diana said, "Knock it off, little Deborah." Delilah said, "Diana, cool it." Diana said, "Well, she was thinking about her girlfriend." Deborah said, "You take that back." Diana said, "Make me." That's when Deborah charged into Diana, but Diana dodged it and tripped Deborah with the side of her leg, making Deborah fall to the floor. Elle said, "What do we have here? A hero?" Deborah said, "Let me go, fool." Pollyanna said, "Deborah, is that you?" Miriam said, "You know her?" Elle said, "Obviously, Delilah and Diana are out there." Pollyanna said, "Delilah's here? Where is she?" Miriam said, "Relax, we'll kill the Roggetti and the deputy." Sasquatch said, "I think your plan is flawed, you see. I have nothing to do with this." Wilfred said, "Don't fail us, Delilah. Good luck with the Roggetti." Hagar said, "Like you can do better." Argo said, "Wait, come back." Diana said, "She is all mine." Delilah said, "Go for it. Don't show her mercy." That's when Argo had no other choice but to battle with Diana. End of chapter. Anyways, if you enjoyed this audiobook chapter, do yourself a favor and click the like button. Leave a comment below the screen. Please subscribe to this channel, as Roggetti Warriors is here to stay. Oh wait, did I say comment? I mean, just actually like this video and subscribe and click the notification bell for new content coming to this channel. And support the cause at patreon.com/Roggetti Warriors by Wretched Films. And until chapter 7, Wilfred escapes with Delilah, I have to say, peace! And thanks for listening.